Today, we have a good session lined up for you, really focused on building policies to support learner pathways. And I'll unpack that a bit before I allow our distinguished panelists to introduce themselves. But what you're going to hear us talk about is a work in progress, and that is both from work that ExcelinEd is undertaking with the support and input of our panelists here who serve on an advisory council with us. And it's also a work in progress, mainly because it feels like everything at this day and age has become a work in progress due to the pandemic. But when we talk about building policies to support learner pathways, we're really talking about something more integrated and broader than just a policy to support specific ed to workforce pathway items. So we're thinking of this more as a continuum that is focused on kind of not just one level, not just K-12, not just post-secondary, not just retraining or looking at displaced workers into the workforce, but really a series of policies and opportunities and experiences that we can make available to learners, to institutions, to programs, and really support them, everything from funding to guidance around what is a high quality credential and so forth. And so our discussion today is going to focus on this concept of an ed to workforce continuum and really what makes up that continuum, and more importantly, what does that work look like on the ground for folks who are really digging in. And that's where I'd like to transition to our panelists and have them introduce themselves, because as I mentioned, they are all kind of doing work that both influences and is inspiring kind of the continuum project that ExcelinEd has undertaken. So Romanita, if you would, I'd love for you to introduce yourself first.
Certainly, thank you, Quentin. I'm Romanita Matta-Barrera. I serve as the Executive Director of ExceWorks. We are the workforce development arm within the San Antonio Economic Development Foundation. And at the core of our mission is growing high quality jobs in the San Antonio region, but doing so through a talent-driven economic development approach. And hence the department and the initiative that I lead, ExceWorks, really focuses on our entire talent pipeline. So when you talk about the continuum, that's precisely within our three core areas around growing our talent in San Antonio. And that's really focusing on building our youth at the K-12 level, as well as in upskilling our adult incumbent workers, but also ensuring the retention and recruitment of talent to San Antonio. So this concept of the continuum is a concept that's not only in theory, but we are actually practicing it every day, because we know that there's an incredible interdependency between workforce, the quality and the skilled workforce, and our ability to recruit and retain high wage, high skill jobs to the San Antonio region.
Great, thank you. Shannon.
Good afternoon. My name is Shannon Gilkey. I am I have a dual appointment. I serve as a senior policy advisor for the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education, which is Kentucky's coordinating board for higher education. But the majority of my time is spent as vice chancellor for economic and workforce development for Kentucky Community and Technical College system. KCTCS serves about 100,000 students each year. We have 16 colleges, and we have a community college physical location about 30 miles from any Kentucky address. So really Kentucky's biggest arm when it comes to both higher education and workforce development. So great to be here.
Great, thank you. And Brent, welcome.
Good late afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Brent Parton. I'm the Deputy Director of the Center on Education and Labor at New America. New America is a nonprofit, nonpartisan policy research organization. We're based in Washington, D.C., but we have multiple folks working on various issues across the country. Where I sit again at the center is focused on better connecting our education workforce policy to our labor markets. I've been working at the intersection of education and workforce development for several years. A lot of the work we lead, which is what makes this work particularly exciting, is around innovative policies as well as programs for promoting economic opportunity, both within or outside traditional post-secondary education. We work on a lot of innovative efforts, for example, the workforce mission of community colleges, do a ton of work on apprenticeship and better connecting apprenticeship programs to higher education and K-12 systems. And so what's thrilling about this is, and the idea of the continuum in particular, is that the work that we have done for several years at working with state policymakers has been about creating an ecosystem that allows these more innovative programs to thrive and again, serve as another way for both young people as well as incumbent workers to connect to economic opportunity. So exciting to be here and share a little about the work that we do at the research, the intersection of research, technical assistance, and communications and writing.
Hey, Quentin, I think you're on mute.
It had to happen at least once. So thank you all for joining us, and really looking forward to hearing more about the work that you do and how it intersects with, this the needs of states, the policies that they're looking to pursue, but more importantly, what does that look like on the ground and how it really is implemented, because we know policies, programs are only as good as the implementation that supports them. But I wanted to take a step back and at least for participants, help them understand kind of the project that we're engaged with, that you're helping us with in this way, and kind of how we got here from this standpoint. ExcelinEd obviously has been working in college career ed to workforce policy for several years. But we've noticed that whether it's working with legislative committees or working with different legislators, that the focus tends to be on one level or on one policy. And we have been guilty of that as well, focusing on specific policies, whether they're credentials or whether they're just looking at K-12 CTE programs. And I think with the pandemic happening and really kind of learning more about the work that's happening on the ground, things that you guys are doing and others, it became really clear to us that we wanted to at least be part of an effort to really alter the narrative around what is a comprehensive approach to building a continuum of ed to workforce policies. And when we think about that, we are talking about really a continuum that spans K-12 and post-secondary and into workforce, and also acknowledges what I think we hear so many people talk more about, is that post-secondary is not a monolith. It's not a bachelor's degree only, that there are multiple programs and they are intertwined with K-12, with workforce efforts and training and retraining, that they can mean a lot of different things in different contexts. And while in the past we have really focused on individual policies, and we are proud of the policy work we've done and our partners who have been there right with us to do that, we have noticed that at the same time, sometimes passing a college acceleration bill is a huge win in many states. For high schoolers, for community colleges wanting to offer those or being able to expand those, but at the same time, without tackling, 2 or 3 other policies, the impact of those pieces are not as great. And so we think of this as looking not just beyond the levels, but what are the comprehensive policies that kind of move across those. And if you're on Amazon and you're buying something, you notice that they always give you frequently bought together. So how can we help states think about policies in a way that it's not just 1 or 2, it is actually kind of pulling a thread that should really focus on multiple pieces. And I think most importantly is with our partners, with our friends, we want to make sure that, when we look and provide states with guidance or advice, or they just come to us for information about what we're seeing, is that we're able to kind of approach this with a vehicle that says, okay, well, here is a straw man, here's a continuum that we think, operates and serves as a good vehicle for the set of policies that can really support a range of efforts and a range of levels. And how can your state evaluate kind of what it has currently in terms of whether there are gaps or areas to strengthen, or real strengths already that we should be thinking about and sharing with other states. So serving as a larger vehicle for this conversation and this narrative going forward. Well, continuum. What are the essential policies, for example, that actually make up the continuum? And so we're working with our advisory council and others to recognize that. And then how can we test it out? How can we actually use it to provide some information to a state? In this case, we'll focus on Florida in our first way as a means of supporting some of the great work that they're doing already, but also providing, well, here's one way to look at and talk about some of these policies and where a state is moving. And then more importantly, is we want to spend time really convening a network, because what we realize in doing this work is that we're not the smartest person in the room, and we're nowhere near that. And we need help from lots of folks to really think about their states, their programs, and their needs. And then how can we customize this notion of a comprehensive continuum to help states in a network, in a community of practice, move this work forward so that it lasts and it sticks. So where are we to date? I would just say we'll share a little bit more about this, but I do want to dig in with our panelists. But right now we've identified 6 main policy areas, which I'll share in a bit, 21 identified policies in total, and really have decided to take a deep dive into 12 states to understand kind of what are we seeing, what can we learn from them, and where are there opportunities that we can engage in a dialogue with partners and governors' offices and legislators to really think about how we can move the ball forward in a substantive way. And I think the urgency of that becomes even greater given where we are right now in the pandemic and some of the systemic weaknesses that maybe we all knew were there in states, but have been really amplified in terms of whether it relates to inequity or whether it relates to how well even augmented stimulus or recovery funds can be delivered in a timely manner to high quality programs. So that is our project that we've embarked on in terms of the continuum. And at this point, we would love to kind of transition and hear a little bit from our panelists, because they are the folks doing work in states, nationally, and on the ground. And would love to get a sense from you a little bit more about the work you're engaged in and how it relates to this concept of a continuum in your work. And we can start. Shannon, you want to kick us off on this one?
Sure, happy to. So Shannon Gilkey from Kentucky, and I'd say that, broadly speaking, there were several years ago, and this is kind of the context of my career in education, we had this moment where we were intentionally focused in Kentucky, and I think as a country, on that transition space between K-12 and post-secondary and college readiness, and a new set of standards emerged out of this intentional focus to make sure that students are transitioning and how they're transitioning, that we're defining it and measuring it and really trying to align that space. And I think with the leadership at ExcelinEd and thinking about this continuum, we're in this moment where we're trying to figure out this transition between education and work. And the way I would frame that in Kentucky, the work we're doing and to support that transition space is to really look at areas that we're aligning well with business and industry in the current and future economy. And I know we're going to talk about the pandemic, so I'm going to put that aside because that's put a whole new lens and then probably accelerated a lot of these issues. But putting the pandemic aside, there is this space in higher education, I think, that is trying to figure out how to better align itself to from education to work. And I think that relates itself to the value proposition facing higher education right now. First, that students are paying more than ever for a post-secondary credential. And 2, employers, because of technology and the rapid impact of that they are expecting more of folks that are coming out of any form of education, particularly post-secondary training, and making sure that those individuals, that talent pipeline can start much sooner than having a long onboarding process. So setting the pandemic aside, Kentucky is intentionally focused on this education to work space, both at the higher ed coordinating board and certainly at the community college, where it resonates itself a lot more in the history and the mission of community colleges. And so there are several things that we're focused on. The first one is really taking work-based learning at scale, and particularly how we better leverage things like apprenticeship that New America has done such great work on and trailblazing work on recently, and as well as looking at how we can take any individual that comes through higher education and figure out a way to make sure they have some form of work-based learning that's high quality when they leave Kentucky higher education. Dual credit we have a long history of dual credit in Kentucky, and really looking at that as a strategy to not just make sure students seamlessly transition from K-12 into post-secondary, but also align itself to what employers and industries are expecting. And then I'd say that the third thing that we should have and wish we would have at right now, given our unemployment numbers and the pandemic, is really prior learning assessment at scale. Making sure that every experience counts, whether it's it's work experience, it's military experience, it's experience that someone or training that someone may have received while they were incarcerated. That we can pivot individuals, particularly when they have an economic crisis like unemployment or a change of career, that we can take prior learning assessment and really look at it as a means to pivoting an individual from an adult, particularly an individual, from one step of their life into that next chapter with the least amount of intrusion or obstruction as possible. And so I would say that in large, those are the three things we're working on in Kentucky right now. And given the pandemic, I have some numbers I'll share a little bit later, why we think that could be so much more helpful right now if we had some of these things in place a little bit sooner than we are working on them right now.
Great, thank you. Brent, I'd love to shift to you now and have you talk a little bit about the work that New America is engaged in, and it's a lot in terms of, especially apprenticeship, youth apprenticeship. How does this approach resonate with you? Because I know folks can be laser focused on apprenticeship, but there's a lot more to it when you think about how that actually operates and the different policies that are impacting it.
Great, good question. Thanks, Quentin. And actually, I'll build exactly off what Shannon said. I thought he laid it out pretty well, that a lot of this work focuses, it's kind of on the transition points across our systems, that our policies are not particularly good at helping people navigate, actual real people, or even helping institutions collaborate, whether those transitions are between learning and work, K-12 or higher ed, between higher ed to the workforce. Those transitions tend to be tough and pretty rough, particularly on the young people who need those transitions to be smooth the most. So we look at a range of policies that are kind of at these critical points that cut across systems. I would say that the work that we do, or I should put it this way, the strategy that we've taken is sometimes one of the powerful ways of looking at how we address those systems and kind of address policy or systems change is looking at the struggles of innovative efforts and programs that are trying to bridge those gaps. We have incredible examples across the country of programs themselves, whether those are apprenticeships, CTE, dual credit, various types of applied learning experiences within our community and technical colleges that really kind of highlight what we want to see more of. What are the ways that those programs can surface where there's problems in our policies that make their scale challenging? Youth apprenticeship is one that we have focused on in particular because it really demands three major actors working in close coordination as a programmatic effort: higher ed, employers, and K-12. And what's really scary about it, I think, is that it calls for kind of what we often call three revolutions at once, which is, on one hand, you're looking at employers to fundamentally look at talent in new ways. That means not expecting years and years of work experience and every post-secondary credential known to man before they have the job. It's asking higher education in some respects to actually value learning that doesn't happen within the classroom. And Shannon, I think, touched on the issue of how do we better systemize recognition of prior learning. Youth apprenticeship is a program that pushes on that. And from a K-12 perspective, it's really figuring out how our K-12 institutions, whether it's accountability or whether it's just within our scheduling, how they can actually make accessible to a broad range of students alternative types of post-secondary pathways that don't look like the traditional college, high school to college experience. When you have programs that really push on our systems that way, it really reveals a lot about what is needed in terms of a broader ecosystem effort. And I think that, again, is kind of what excites me most about the continuum approach, is that even as we have worked on really targeted programmatic strategies like youth apprenticeship, we know it demands often a state policy posture or framework that really looks at those broader issues in a way and tries to make programs like youth apprenticeship, other work-based learning, or other types of kind of career and technical dual credit programs more abundant and easy to navigate. So we've had the opportunity to work on with states that, while a certain program like youth apprenticeship is what they want more of, we've worked with diverse states like Washington, Indiana, and California on what does it mean to create an ecosystem that seeks better collaboration at the governance level across industry, K-12 and higher ed, looks at innovative financing, and also ways to touch on some of those practical challenges to manage those transition points, particularly when it comes to learning and into the workforce.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's a great segue to Romanita, who we've known each other for several years now, and it's, San Antonio Works is laser focused on the region of San Antonio and sits right at the center of that kind of three-spoked hub that Brent was talking about. Would love to hear kind of your thoughts in terms of the work that you're doing and how this resonates.
Certainly, Quentin, when I think about the continuum as it relates to pathways, as you're quite familiar, we've been working on the continuum as it relates to work-based learning, right? And I think it's all in relation, and it all leads to how to make these pathways much more relevant and reachable, so that by embedding work-based learning early on for youth, and ideally, as we are transitioning now, working with adults and upskilling of adults as well, that those pathways become clearer. I like to say, and maybe because I don't come at this work from an academic approach, that we have made the conversation of career pathways very academic and theoretical in nature. And now more than ever, we need to make it real, relatable, and again, and attainable. What do these pathways mean for an adult, and those transitions that they are being confronted with the reality of being dislocated from a job? How can we make those pathways much easier and facilitate that? And so at a local level, when we were first founded 5 years ago, we were an industry-led and continue to be an industry-led initiative, because we found that it was really critical for the employers to have a voice in our industry sector to really drive a lot of that conversation, because we felt that at the education and workforce arenas, they were operating in silos. And when we would speak to our employers, they would often talk about, to Brent's point, right, the dissatisfaction of like, well, I don't have a person who's ready to work. They may not have the credentials or the skills I need. So we decided, great, well, let's engage you so that you can become a part of the solution, but also help inform in terms of what are some of the priorities that around skills development, training, certifications, degrees, but also just those critical skills that will lead someone to employability. And so here we find ourselves, and I know we're trying to avoid the topic of the pandemic, but we are sitting here in the midst of 8 months into it, and I can proudly say that at a local level, we've really had it's now or never moment for us. We had been looking at our low educational attainment scores, and again, this is all relevant. If we have high skilled and low and high levels of educational attainment, we will be able to continue to attract and keep those high wage jobs that we want our residents across our region to be able to readily enter, versus having to recruit talent. And so just a month ago, 2 months ago now, we were able to pass locally SA Ready to Work. So it was a ballot initiative, and we all know there were a lot of very important items on the November ballot, and but there was a concerted effort across the community, and the realization that this was a very important investment for the future workforce of San Antonio. And so within the months of COVID, the city and the county had already invested some public dollars, general fund dollars, into these workforce training programs and the wraparound services. So when we talk about pathways too, it's how to eliminate any obstacles that will prevent someone from being able to be successful in a career pathway. And so the investment was really not only around the training programs themselves, but also critical case management support. And with the passage of the proposition, that will extend the work that many of us are engaged in today for the next 5 years into 2025. So we really hope that what we're doing locally could be something that we could look at the state level around really investing in critical case management support and upskilling of individuals, in particular adults who have been dislocated from their jobs. And so we're excited about what we're doing locally, but I do have to say at the state level, and Quentin, you were part of those incredible efforts. We do have the Tri-Agency Workforce Initiative that does include our Texas Education Agency, our Texas Workforce Commission, and our Texas Higher Ed Coordinating Board. So I think there's been a lot of conversation around the importance of that continuum, but we are now in the midst of really implementing a lot of critical work that will help someone just realize their future career pathway as well.
Great, thank you. And I'm glad, given how contentious the election was, that this was something that was a rallying point for San Antonio. I want to pivot just a minute because I feel like we're at a really great point at which we are talking about different, we're talking about both a comprehensive approach in the way that systems touch each other or interact with each other, and the different policies that are kind of interwoven throughout the support of pathways. But one thing I've learned, and I think we've all learned in this conversation about a continuum, is it's very abstract. And when we're talking about kind of what is it, what makes it up. And so I'm going to share, as part of our project and with our panelists' input and other advisory council members, our attempt at kind of like really pulling some of the threads of conversation out of what you've said around who are we talking about and is it impacting when we think about learners. Who's involved? Who has to be involved and at the table to really think about these? And then finally, let's put a stake in the ground and think about what are the policies that we could say preliminarily make up an ed to workforce continuum, knowing that you could probably say, well, what about this? What about that? But let's put a stake in the ground and kind of go from there. So I'm going to share, hopefully this comes up, and I'm going to try to make it as big as I can. But bear with me, that we tried to create this in a form that makes it easier to look at. And so this is our visualization of a continuum. And at the top, you'll notice that there's a fundamental kind of value proposition around learners. And that is, we have to recognize, as you've all noticed, whether it's at the regional level, local level, that learners take different educational journeys and pathways. And so I won't go through this whole illustration, but we've tried to kind of look at 3 different learners. One who is using college acceleration or an early college high school to accelerate her pathway to a bachelor's degree. And along the way, there are certain policies like early post-secondary credit, transfer articulation, work-based learning opportunity that have accelerated her ability and made it even more accessible for, in this case, Alex to earn her bachelor's and go to work. At the same time, you have a second learner, Jordan, who is advancing in a different route, earning through industry recognized certifications and credentials, and then going on and apprenticing with a company that provides them employment and additional opportunities for post-secondary credentials. And then finally, we have Taylor here, who has been displaced in terms of automation or in his advanced manufacturing job. And now he is looking at policies and opportunities to go back and retrain. So when you think about these learners, they're all at different points in their journeys, but the need for the policies, the programs, and the high quality implementation to be in place to support all of them is there. And we call them big road signs, but you'll notice that there are lots of these policies that we've identified, whether it's a CTE program of study, whether it's a last mile scholarship helping Taylor pay for his credentials so he can go to work as a nurse. All of these are kind of interwoven and hopefully are, when implemented well and used by multiple stakeholders, which you can see underneath, everyone from employers to intermediaries, policymakers, agencies, and communities, that they're used to leverage and really kind of remove barriers to access, remove barriers to those. And if you think about what we hope is propping up a lot of this, and they can't be of service on their own, but are really 21 policies that we've identified across 6 areas. And they are, these 6 areas: learner pathways, accelerating someone's ability to earn a post-secondary credential, making sure that that pathway actually ends with credential attainment. Those are 2 very different things, and something that I feel like, states we've heard a lot really struggle with. This notion of what it means to be workforce ready, the idea of having employers at the table and engaging them, but really thinking about that this, you're asking folks to put skin in the game. So what does that mean in terms of roles and responsibilities, in terms of the policies that can actually be an incentive for employers, not only to engage, but to be a part of that community? And then finally, I think is something that we struggle with, I think, in terms of figuring out how to measure, figuring out how do we establish this as a vision, but what are the alignment and quality indicators that make sure that these pathways are really pointing not at the low wage, low skilled jobs that we know are not going to be family sustaining, but are focused on those higher skill, higher wage, high demand occupations that are going to lead to a lifetime of career advancement. And when we think about those, there are policies underneath each of those, and some of them span just K-12 through post-secondary, but some of them reach to and through and beyond throughout the whole series of levels. But under learner pathways, you have things like CTE program funding, targeted funding. Post-secondary acceleration are things like making sure that you have college acceleration opportunities on the books and a plurality of them, that you're thinking about transfer and articulation in credential attainment. You're thinking about stackable credentials, some outcomes-based funding. And when you get to workplace readiness, that's where we're hearing, there's so much focus being on work-based learning, making sure that these are experiences that are going to lead to both post-secondary credit in some cases, but also those skills that employers really need. So at a high level, we wanted to at least kind of put a frame around this is a thing, and it's not that abstract a thing. Whether we get it right 100% is not really something I think we can make perfect, but this is the kind of work in progress that we're thinking of, and we think about states wanting to engage in different policies and look at different opportunities to pursue and strengthen these programs and policies, that here is at least a framework we can start to coalesce around and think about in terms of also those kind of frequently brought together, that we know we can't tackle some of the credential attainment pieces without the acceleration and other pieces. We can't really focus on employer engagement alone without having some very clear quality indicators and a shared vision for what those outcomes need to be. So I want to transition back to the panelists, because I think, we're at a point where there's despite our past year of tumultuous elections and so forth, college and career pathways, ed to workforce, however we want to term this sector, is still, and I hope will continue to be, something that people do coalesce around as being a priority for states and learners. But I'd love for you to think about, like, which policies now, especially that we are going to be coming out of this pandemic, we hope, in half a year or whenever that distribution starts to really hit home. But what are some of for policymakers, the low-hanging fruit, if there is such a thing, or real opportunities that you see amongst these kind of continuum policies that folks should focus on? And you feel free to make that relevant or kind of prioritized for your work, if you like, or your state or your region. Brent, I'd love to, have you kick it off for us.
Picking on me, I'm the low-hanging fruit. It's fine. Yeah, so I think, one of the pieces, I don't even know if it's low-hanging fruit, but it feels like it's kind of the keystone for a lot of these other policies. So I think we have to look at employer engagement. I think we have to look at it from kind of two perspectives, however. On one hand, policies that seek, particularly in a time of economic recovery, we don't know what the shape of the recovery is. We don't know what the shape or contours of federal or state aid might be, or any recovery packages. But the states that have taken a really proactive role to engage industry at the strategic system level and bring them into some of the decision making, now whether that's at a state level or a regional level, are going to be better positioned to deploy resources as they become available in a really strategic way to support a lot of these other goals. So I think on one hand, thinking about opportunities to bring employers into some of the, for lack of a better word, governance of the continuum is really going to be key. And states that have been working on that, I've mentioned a few that we've been engaged with, are trying to think about how to elevate industry leadership, obviously building on existing structures like state workforce boards or advisory councils around career and technical education, local workforce boards. There's a lot of different places employers are engaged in our respective systems, but really trying to bring, if we are trying to promote this cross-silo approach, how do we bring industry in on the front end to help kind of talk about some of the governance side? The employer engagement, however, at a more localized level, I think is something that we have to be thinking about in the near term as well. It's going to be tough. It's going to be a tight labor market. If we've learned anything from the recession, employers tend to raise the thresholds for their entry-level jobs, not lower them as more people are looking for work. But to the extent that we as local or state policymakers are able to, again, kind of think about how to bring, employer engagement into the training programs that we want to help prepare people for jobs on the other side, whether that's in an advisory role or having them participate in lighter touch work-based learning, maybe when they're not full on able to bring folks on, is going to pay dividends down the road as the labor market starts to strengthen. So I guess one of the low-hanging fruit is to be thinking at the hard question, which is around employer engagement. But it is an opportunity to be thinking about some of the planning and strategy now before the kind of any actions around recovery might take hold.
Great. No, that's very insightful, and I think something that is tough when especially if we're going to be looking at federal stimulus dollars, large amounts of dollars that are typically one time. How do you leverage those in a way that makes sense? Shannon, I'd love to hear your thoughts in terms of this. Oh, you're on mute.
Great. I want to build off what Brent said about employer engagement. But what I learned when I came back to Kentucky about 1.5 years ago is that we engage employers all the time. We engage them because of Perkins. We engage them because of customized training. We engage them to host an internship or apprenticeship. And everyone's trying to get employers into the talent development, but we're not doing it systematically at the state level, all the way down. And there's a lot of engagement out there to really help employers, but also help individuals stay in Kentucky and retain, develop and retain our own Kentuckians. But we're not doing it systematically. And a couple of years ago, I was really pleased when I returned to Kentucky that they've been working on that, adopting the U.S. Chamber's talent pipeline management system, which uses supply chain technology to really look at building collaboratives. A lot of them regionally based, like Romanita's work there in San Antonio, because economies are local and regional, and these intermediaries to really systematically engage employers cannot be understated or overstated. Sorry, because we haven't been doing it throughout history systematically. And TPM is just one really great methodology to do that. So I want to make sure I bring that up. It's critical what Brent said about having a common framework or a collective approach from state down into our local and regional economies that do that and bring our employer partners, because they're going to need people, and they're going to need people to be able to pivot differently and learn and do things differently as the pandemic has hit their local businesses, small, from my dad's little welding shop in Madisonville, Kentucky, up to Toyota in Georgetown, Kentucky. Everyone's going to need their employers to think and work differently because of technology or a pandemic or the next economic swing once we get through this one. So, want to say that again. But I think internally in education, I think some policies that are low-hanging fruit are, express articulation strategies. How do you, in an accelerated way, have an articulation policy agenda that allows a dual credit high school teacher that wants to build an articulated apprenticeship with their research university or their local community college and a business, that they can get that mechanism, seamless, so it's easy for the practitioner to develop that apprenticeship or develop that dual credit program or work-based learning if it's not apprenticeship. I also think at the state level that also will, that I've learned in Kentucky, it comes down to the local and regional, because everything's local for Kentuckians or for students, is workforce investment boards. And it's really hard because of the way the dollars flow from, WIOA dollars flow from the federal, so you got to work through that. But MOUs are powerful pieces of paper that can really take and establish formal policy partnerships to make sure that the local workforce investment boards partnering with the high schools and community colleges to develop a joint, approach to career advising. I think, and then the third thing I would say is we can learn a lot from unemployed adults right now. In Kentucky, we have about 400,000 Kentuckians that don't have some kind of post-secondary credential. It's by and large the majority of our unemployed population right now. And so Tony Carnevale at Georgetown, who said that after the 2008 recession, 99% of jobs required, living wage jobs required some form of post-secondary training. Not everyone has to have a PhD, but some form of post-secondary training. I think our economy would look a lot different if in Kentucky, if we had a fraction of that 400,000 with post-secondary completion of some sort. So we're realizing, and we can learn a lot from those adults that are unemployed right now and how their learner pathway could have been different to help them better prepare for this moment in their life. And I think we have to take advantage of that opportunity. It also tells us a lot about the mechanisms we have in higher education to serve adults right now that are unemployed, like prior learning assessment or like a GED attainment or a credential attainment, and how quickly we can get those folks advised, leveraging, financial aid opportunities, whether they're federal or state, and then into a program and back to work quickly. If not, putting them in a work-based learning, like an adult apprenticeship that lets them not skip a paycheck, but also get that next credential or training that they need so they can shorten the time that they have financially to not help provide for their families. So I think low-hanging fruit in that internal world, again, certainly the business engagement that Brent mentioned, but internally across K-12 and higher ed and in education and in our workforce investment boards is just ripe for innovation.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Romanita, do you see any kind of immediate opportunities or urgency in your work or in San Antonio that you feel like folks should be tackling?
Certainly, I think Brent and Shannon are speaking my language, right? We've been in the midst of this employer-led, industry-led workforce work now for some time, because all of this work that's happening either at our K-12 or post-secondary institutions, including the investments today that our city is doing with our public dollars, industry was at the table, and it was really critical for us to echo industry's voice, because all of this training in the end needs to lead to employability. And who knows about employability better than employers, and those employers that represent some of our top industry sectors across our community. And so really tapping into that employer voice today is much more critical than it has ever been. Because we need to ensure that those individuals, especially if we're thinking and talking about adults who have been dislocated from their jobs and may need to transition to an entirely new industry, those industry insights from employers, from the existing employees even in those industries, are going to be really critical to really reveal how can you think of transitioning into a career in manufacturing when you maybe were in facilities maintenance in a hospitality job, and to really help close the loop and create that relatability. And so I think it's critical for us to have industry, but we also have to realize that because of different community sizes and their access to employers, we often are tapping the same employers all the time. And we hear this from our employer collaboratives, especially our smaller employers, to say, yeah, that's easy for the big guys to assign a person who's working on community initiatives and who can sit in that CTE advisory board, but I don't have that bandwidth. You know, I've got to be running my shop or running my my manufacturing business. And so I think it's real important that we also capture the industry insights and the feedback that our smaller to mid-sized employers also can provide us in terms of what are their workforce needs and how they can also be a part of the solution. So we've talked about apprenticeships and other opportunities, but on the job training, which is an investment that we've made locally as well. So part of our public dollar investments are either you go into a training program and you get paid a $15 an hour stipend, or you get paid $15 an hour to actually do on the job training, obviously for a limited amount of time. But thinking about those creative ways to also keep in mind that a lot of our businesses have also been impacted and their operations and their ability to generate revenue, and that they've seen some unexpected cost in order to ensure that they provide safe work environments. So if we're able to support them by saying, well, I'm going to bring to you an individual who may not have all the right skills, but has these other behavioral attributes, these positive behavioral attributes. And by the way, our community is also investing in their training. I think that's a great way also for us just to keep the economy afloat. But that's from an employer perspective. From a job seeker or a learner pathway perspective, I think the accelerated pathways are really critical. Now, we're also talking about the majority of adults who have been dislocated from their jobs, and they're going to need faster solutions to get upskilled and then get right back into the workforce. And so I think that's going to be really critical for us to look into higher ed. We've seen the evolution of boot camps and the tech sector. And so we may be having to think about that creatively in other sectors as well, to just get dislocated adults trained up and then right back into the workforce in a more accelerated fashion. So I think that's going to be really critical for us to look at.
That's a great segue. And we have about 10 minutes left. I want to encourage participants, if you have questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A. There is one there. And I think, Romanita, and this is to any of you who want to kind of address it, but there's a question here that says, with the focus on looking at work-based learning, will this involve, ramping up an academy model of schools? And I think I would, academy models are typically a K-12 focused on specific sectors of industry or STEM or some of those things. But it sounds like, are there school models, I know you mentioned a boot camp at the adult level, that you feel like can play a role, or are school models less important than some of the activities you've been talking about in terms of making sure that there are different pieces there? But what role do you think, expanding certain school models would make in this effort to kind of make school more relevant in the terms of work-based learning?
So I would say it's all of the above, right? It's not just it's an and or, and we're doing that too. So I can say proudly in San Antonio, and I think you're familiar with them also, Quentin, with the CAST models that are Centers for Applied Science and Technology. So those are high school models where they're entirely experience, work-based learning, project-based learning. So really bringing those career pathways to life, where we have even employers weighing in on the ergonomics of what our technology-focused school is looking like, so that we can help build healthier workers in the IT and tech space. And so I think it's a combination of all of that. I don't think it's a one solution to it all. There are students who will continue to want to go to a multidisciplinary, high school, a traditional high school model, but embedding work-based learning opportunities within a traditional high school model, and also complementing that with more of these work-based learning school models or P-TECH models as well. All will help ideally, so that I think in terms of like youth not graduating from high school, and that's our biggest concern, is that they're still graduating from high school, and that transition into, for those who are choosing not to go into post-secondary into the workforce, is just not happening. And so I think that's having all of those options available where possible is really critical.
I would add to that, I think we've commonly made a mistake, and it's just sometimes a matter of priorities around, we focus on the development, for example, of apprenticeship opportunities or accelerated customized training programs at our colleges to be really responsive and pivot to employers' needs, but not back map into our K-12 programs and trying to really build a sustainable talent pipeline. At the same time, we've seen tremendous innovation around career academies that have been able to expose, and even beyond them, just our really comprehensive career and technical education programs that focus on exposing people as early as middle school up into taking a few courses and becoming concentrators in high school, but we don't have the destination for them on the other side that transition them to post-secondary. So part of the idea of the continuum is that those can't be independent pursuits anymore, and where we've seen real progress and actually being joined by folks from within Texas and Kentucky is exciting here, because there are examples of places, whether in Louisville, how their career academies have really clearly looked to build out into registered apprenticeship programs to give those students that want to continue in that path a really clear next step. And in Texas, where there's been a lot of innovation around career academies and PTECs, focusing on sort of how to better link that up with community college programs, again, whether those are things that look like apprenticeships or more of the Alamo Colleges model. A continuum of a true alternative pathway is one where if we've been preparing young people for college when they're in sixth grade or earlier, we have to be having the same mentality around career pathways.
Yeah, I think, Laura, I would answer your question. I taught in one of those. We had academy model schools in Louisville, Kentucky, actually. That was my first job in education. And, I think where I see the direction of a crystal ball in this alignment is in the world of competencies. And I'd love to hear the other panelists on because we're missing a common language between education and work, where the knowledge and skills that you get in education, do they translate into the knowledge and skills an employer need or not? And secondly, I think particularly in higher education, not everyone has time to go back and do a master's degree or a long-term certificate, like a master's degree or another bachelor's degree, to then be able to get that next, step in their career ladder. And so this misalignment and these kind of chunks, and this is where I think competencies has so much potential, is allows people to go through their continuum, their journey from cradle to career, and not have to redo things, but add to or stack as their life changes. Whether that's forced upon them because of the economy, or that they want a career change or want that next step on their career ladder or earn more living. And so if I had to think about or envision how work-based learning looks and feels, or actually all different types of learning looks and feels, it would be more in how do you start in K-12 or even pre-K, start building towards a high set of competencies over time that end with that advanced training so folks can survive in the workforce.
I'm going to throw in just as a plug, though, I think on the low-hanging fruit side and work-based learning, there are things that Texas has done, that Kentucky has done, Indiana, to really, so there's two ways, it takes a while to build a program and it takes that initiative, but there are things at the policy level that they can remove barriers, perceived and real. So work-based learning, allowing folks to circumvent or purchase liability insurance for students, so that employers, even if there's not as much of a risk as they think they are, they need that. Kentucky's partnered with Adecco, a temp firm, to basically just take that burden off of schools and employers both. It could mean making sure that the transportation that's available, that there are protections there. So I don't mean to jump into this too much, but I think for policymakers, there are some very easy remedies that don't carry any fiscal note that will at least remove a barrier, or in some cases, just remove the perception of a barrier for those engagement with employers. Let's see, we have another question in here. No, thank you. So we are down to just 2 minutes, I think. I'd love for each of you to say, okay, well, that policymakers are going to probably be faced with a lot of one-time funding coming down the pike, pandemic funding, all of that is a huge opportunity. I think it's well needed, and there's going to be a huge clamoring for how those dollars are spent, and we know a couple of things. One, it'll be a sizable chunk of money. Two, it's not going to be enough to plug all the holes. So I'd love to get from your perspective, if you could give, policymakers a word of advice. How should they approach, kind of making a dent and really improving that continuum with these kind of limited single-use funds? And those can be priorities that you care deeply about. It could be policy, it could be in general. So just last 2 minutes. Shannon, I'll pick on you first this time. I've been picking on Brent.
Okay, great. Well, I would say that, there are going to be students graduating from high school, and whether the pandemic is over in May or in 2021 or 2023, we've got folks coming from high school or higher education that are looking for direction and looking for that transition. And you have folks that are unemployed right now because particularly in retail and hospitality in Kentucky. And so I think low-hanging fruit strategy and I know we've talked about it a lot. It's probably because we've been thinking about it a lot, the three of us in our different chairs, our work-based learning. How do you get businesses the type of workforce that they need to pivot, because businesses are pivoting, but at the same time give citizens opportunity to transition from whatever pipe they're coming from into that next work, whatever it looks like. I think that's a critical. And the other one I would say is, and this is, reaction to the pandemic as well, is that we've learned to use technology, particularly working remotely in many different ways at scale. I mean, KCTCS, if you had had a conversation with our entire system to move 100,000 students online in October of 2019, you probably would have been laughed out of the room. But we did it in April of 2020 because there was a need, and our students needed to do that, and our faculty delivered. And so anything we can do to help both businesses and our workforce make that next leap in technology or cloud-based jobs or cloud-based economy, I think will pay dividends and with resources that are going to come down one-time use, because it's not going away. And I would say even the conference circuit that we all love to attend, I love to attend, is going to dramatically change like it has today. And so I think those two areas I would advocate for.
We'll have to keep it quick. Brent, Romanita, just a couple things each, or one thing each, and we'll let folks go. We're at time.
I think you put your finger on it. There's a lot that can be done at the state level to clean up guidance. I'd bring together departments of education, workforce, higher education, and try to put out some joint guidance around making work-based learning easier, transferring credit across systems, and getting regional partners together and have a strategy for how you want to get that money out onto the ground. I think that is going to be key. That's where people are hired and trained and where the recovery is going to happen. So clean up your policy and get your regional partners ready.
It's a creative reallocation of dollars, looking at where we're already spending money and how we can creatively reallocate towards our workforce. Our workforce is our economic engine.
Great. Thank you all for a wonderful discussion, and thanks for everyone who joined us today. This is the end of day one of EdPalooza. Thanks for joining us, and if you have any questions about things discussed in the session, please feel free to reach out to ExcelinEd. Shannon, Brent, Romanita, always a pleasure to see you. Thank you so much.